Welcome, everybody. I'm Diana Gill. I'm the Vice Chair of the IEEE side of Montreal section. I'm just give a brief introduction about IEEE side, just for those who are not familiar with this program. In the next slide, SIDE stands for Special Interest Group on Humanitarian Technology. It's a global network of IEEE volunteers, well, and non-members as well, partnered with underserved communities and local organizations to leverage technology for sustainable development. The idea is to tackle key problems within the local community and solve them through technology by applying our technical skills. IEEE SIDE is a subcommittee of the IEEE Humanitarian Activities Committee, HAC, and in IEEE side, we have many possibilities to solve local problems. For example, in Nicaragua, there is a project to enable access to electricity to more than 20 communities. Or in Honduras, they did a project about the school electrification. In Uganda, there was a project to reduce new mortality rates. And if you search in the web page, you'll find many types of humanitarian technology projects. Next slide. All these projects are basically funded by the Humanitarian Activities Committee and SIDE. There are many funding opportunities, as you see here in this slide. There are special proposals, call for proposals for side projects that can ask for $1,000 to almost $20,000. For hack projects, it's like another level, from 20,000 to 60,000. We have also a possibility to have for hack events up to 15,000. Also, there is a program to motivate the conference participants up to 750,000. And in these times, as everybody knows, we are in very unprecedented times for to fight against the COVID pandemic. To 5,000. There is still time to submit a proposal. The deadline is extended. It was extended to June 1st. So if you have an idea and you want to help with this pandemic, so there is time to submit a proposal inside to site and hack. In Montreal, well, we are just a very small group that was recently reactivated. We are trying to collaborate with Hacking Health. Hacking Health is a not-for-profit organization that innovates in the healthcare sector. And they also have a very many initiatives to fight against this pandemic. In that page, COVID Sparboard, there is a lot of information about it. And with them, we are also promoting participation in Cooperathon. Cooperathon is like a very big hackathon during 25 days, and is the largest open innovation around the world. That focus on like 6 sustainable development goals and has social impact at all scales. This year, we hope to work on at least one project. Let's see what happens. Maybe with Hacking or well, maybe now with Valentine that we are starting a collaboration with the AI Impact Alliance. So we'll see what happens next. And that's why we are looking for volunteers, because we are just 5 people now. And if you want to join us, so please contact us at side. Slide, please. contact us at site.montreal@gmail.com. There is also information in our new webpage that, thanks to Mohammed, we have this webpage now. So welcome everybody. Thank you for attending this webinar, and happy IEEE Site Day. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana, so much for that introduction. And now, Valentine, I'll go ahead and get your presentation ready.
Yeah, that's good. So as Diana mentioned, I think some of the issues that AI Impact Alliance has been discussing, and a lot of AI ethicists has been discussing already in the past 2 or 3 years, have been accentuated by the COVID pandemic. And I think it's really an important time, a great opportunity to write the next page of our history. And that's why I chose this title today for the talk, and we can change slides. Okay, AI in itself is a historical opportunity. PwC projects that it could boost the global GDP by 15.7 trillion by 2030. Those numbers have not been revised since the COVID pandemic. The WHO has forecasted one of the worst, the United Nations have talked about one of the worst depressions, economic depression. So those numbers probably have been affected by now, but it still is a huge opportunity to boost our economy and our GDP. It also, a lot of experts have been underlying the fact that AI could increase social inequalities. So I think there's important choices that we need to make. If you could go to the next slide, please. So I think I've already mentioned that in the previous slide already. We're talking about coming out of the post-COVID or the with COVID, but overall this pandemic is having an impact on our economic situation. It has revealed, unfortunately, for example, in the States, here in Quebec, in Canada, there's been some extremely sad stories around how our elderly, the most vulnerable in society, are suffering more than others from COVID. So we are revealing some social inequalities through this pandemic, this tragedy. And I think it's also bringing up the importance of a safety net and access to public services. So the next slide, please. In that context, I think it's really important on today's topic to talk about AI's potential to solve humanitarian issues, to solve the impact of COVID. There's a forecast of increase in famine internationally. And so I think it's important, probably, I think, because in the context of the call that IEEE is doing to, and please ask me questions after I do this talk, because the presentation is actually extremely short, about AI's social potential. It has a lot of uses in the field of education, in the field of healthcare, suicide prevention, housing allocation for homeless, human rights, increasing access to human rights, and increasing the access to employment. How can we achieve that potential is what I'd like to talk about in the next couple of slides. The next slide. Okay. I'm going to talk about how to be able to achieve that potential. It's important to look at who is making AI. So who is using AI now? If you look at the image that I think to the right of your screen, the Canadian AI ecosystem, you'll see a little yellow portion. The little yellow portion is the public and nonprofit use of AI. The rest is 95% use of AI is in for-profit organizations. AI is generally being used right now to optimize operations, but it could also optimize operations for the nonprofit sector and the public sector. If we look on the image on the left side, it's a similar result, a different type of visual that shows that nonprofits are not using AI to as much to accelerate. That has a lot of impact on what we choose to do with AI. It has a lot of impact on who understands how AI works, and it has an impact on the governance of AI. So we're going to go to the next slide and keep diving into who is using AI. A lot of the work of AI Impact Alliance has to do with advocacy, education around the use of AI in civil society organizations, in community-based organizations, I think are commonly used, the word more used in the States. In France, they call them the associative sector. So depending where you are in the world, maybe there's a different word for what I'm referring to, but in general, nonprofit organization that is striving to achieve a sustainable development goal, that is fighting for human rights or better access to health or education. Those are the kind of organizations where research and social innovation shows that by involving these type of organizations in the development and the application of new technology and science, facilitates the trust, the understanding. It accelerates safe, responsible, and relevant adoption of new technology. Could we go to the next slide, please? It also improves the algorithmic quality of the AI that is being used. If you Google after this meeting or while I'm talking, Professor Milind Tambe, he's now at Harvard University. He was previously at the Center for AI and Society at Southern California University. And he participated in various conferences and workshops that I organized. And his response to what is the benefit of working with civil society organizations as a technician, as a computer scientist, is that it really improves the quality of data that you will be collecting and the kind of questions that you will be asking. Therefore, it improves the algorithmic quality of the AI that is being produced for humanitarian use. The next slide, please. Speaking of civil society and community-based organizations, the nonprofit, or if I quote unquote, very large definition of social sector, statistics show that 7 in 10 women are in that sector. Those are the employees, the paid staff in nonprofit sector are 70 to 80% women, depending on what statistics we look at. There is also a higher number of elderly workers, of new immigrant workers, of young workers with, maybe less work experience, but innovative ideas, are working in these community-based organizations. If we go look at who's working in AI right now, in the research institutions, 15% only of women are published in AI. If we look at Mila, who's the Quebec Institute for Research in AI, there are 5% women in researchers there. If we look at who the AI staff at Facebook or Google, we get similar percentage, 15, 10%. If we continue looking at statistics and diversity, the last 2018, so not 2019, I think it was 2019, 2018, NURIP. So I don't know how many of you, usually I can see the crowd in front of me and I get a feel, but for those of you who are familiar with NURIP, it's one of the oldest, most prestigious, important conferences on AI where people come together to share knowledge and understanding around the use of AI. In 2018, I was co-organizing the AI for Social Good workshop with Joshua Bengio, with whom we collaborate on a regular basis. And There were 6 Black people out of 8,500 attendees at that conference. It was also the first year where some papers from African universities were accepted. And don't hesitate to ask me questions on how we managed to make that happen, because it was a first and a lot of people participated in making that, that happening. But basically what I'd like to bring here is that we have a social sector and we have a AI sector. Women are not the majority in the AI sector. There's more men, there's less diversity in the AI sector, and a lot more women, a lot more diversity in the social sector. There's an expertise there and an understanding of certain social realities that's very important to bridge. So next slide, please. So here is kind of trying to round up, trying to bring the tech and social expertise together. And I put in quotes there, not problem owners. I've heard that expression used a lot. I don't really like it. And I think it's really important if most of you are coming from a technical sector, or if you're coming from the social sector, not to see yourself as a problem owner, and not to see community-based organizations as problem owners. They are solution owners, they're stakeholders. They bring social expertise that is extremely important and be able to, as we said earlier, ask the right questions and collect the right data. So by bringing together tech and social expertise, we can achieve more inclusion and diversity, which in another talk I would explain that we really have this diversity crisis in the field of AI. And we can also achieve more beneficial humanitarian potential, unlock that potential, and also, we'll be moving on to the next slide, achieve legitimate ethical guidelines that are more representative of everyone's values. Who is developing AI and who is governing AI is also extremely important. Just a little side note, I travel across the country. I work with a lot of organizations who are at the sort of a digital gap. Their websites barely work. So if I call and I say, I would like to talk to you about AI and the potential for your community, the reaction I get very often is, why do you want to talk to me about AI? My website doesn't work. It's extremely important to onboard and work with these organizations. And also on the other side, I hear tech industry using that expertise to be part of AI governance work groups, and these other civil society organizations groups not being part of the discussion because they don't have the technical expertise to participate in those discussions. I think it's extremely important, and if you are doing outreach work and you are going to work with humanitarian groups, make sure that they don't feel that their lack of technical understanding is not a kind of lack of expertise that excludes them from the conversation around the governance of AI and what kind of ethical frameworks we should be building and what values we want integrated into those frameworks. There's research, and the quote, the link is at the, not the link, but the researchers' names is at the bottom. So Anna Chauvin did this research on the global landscapes of AI ethics documents. In short, 54.7% of all the documents were produced either by or with the private sector that is developing these new technologies. There is a very small percentage of academic, civil society, independent ethical guidelines that are out there. One of them is the Montreal Declaration. I think it's part of the 1.2% of ethical guidelines documents that were published. I know IEEE also did a lot of work, but honestly, between you and me, I'm sorry, IEEE, but a lot of your members are corporate and from the private sector. So if you can, I would really, I think it's extremely important moving forward that if we want to have independent, credible trustable ethical guidelines, we need to involve civil society organization a lot more. And to do that, they need to start understanding how AI works and what the different implications in society are. It's also a problem when we look at global participation. 40.5% are produced by the US and by the UK, versus African and South American countries had none that were published. I'm not saying the discussion and the dialogue's not going on, but they're not coming out. And that means that the values that are integrated into those documents are not being heard. And values we all are aware of can depend on different cultural perspectives. Next page, please. So I'm coming close to the end of the talk. Who makes AI? Who governs AI? Why are we using AI? What's our purpose in using AI are very important questions to be asking ourselves. It matters. And I think it's really important to work together with these organizations, because together we can make a difference. You can make a difference. So I think this is almost my last slide. I think there's just one more after this. You've probably heard by now the expression ethics washing. And if you haven't, it's an interesting, very important. I am a lawyer, a mediator, and an artist. I wear all three hats. As a lawyer, I think laws and regulation is extremely important. The problem right now is if we regulate now, there's not enough civil society organization participation into who's developing those guidelines, and that is the problem. So our definition of what ethical AI is an informed, inclusive social dialogue about its implications, with action against its risks and commitment to make its benefits realized. So I'm against the ethics washing. I really think it's important to have more public dialogue and informed and inclusive dialogue around what values we want and what projects we want AI to be used for. Committing to responsible AI means socializing its benefits. That means if AI can be used in health, is there a way that it can benefit access to public health care versus using it in a startup where the data goes to a private organization? It's very important, and we don't have time today to get into that, or don't hesitate to ask me questions, but there's socializing the benefits means making sure that the benefits that AI can provide to society are accessible to everyone. Democratizing its access, we talked about that a little bit earlier too, is making sure that these organizations, not-profit organizations, can also have access. Last slide, please. So in line with our goals at AI Impact Alliance of having an inclusive, informed dialogue, we will be, and to adapt to the COVID reality, we usually do a lot of workshops internationally, here in Montreal, across Canada, in Chile, and but now is not a great time for traveling and in-person meetings. And as I said, I will be putting on another hat for moving forward a little bit, filmmaker hat. We received support from Microsoft, and we will be producing AI stories, which are short documentaries. And the two topics that we'll be covering to start with are the future of work, and the other one is AI and cultural diversity, how AI can be used to help the cultural sector, who's very severely affected right now. But it's a series, and we'll be looking at the impact on healthcare, how it can improve access to education, climate, and the impact on democracy. So that's our latest project that I was really happy and excited to be able to announce today. Thank you very much, everyone.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Valentine, for sharing. And now we'll go ahead and move over to Sampath.
Okay.
Okay, Sampath, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Juliana. That was a fantastic presentation from Valentine. My focus today is going to be on, calling out what are the various streams of AI, and calling out some practical applications of AI and also to see how IEEE site as a program can provide you a grant opportunity to solve some of the pressing challenges what we are facing right now. So I'm going to stage it that way. So wanted to make sure at the end of the day that potentially the participants or the attendees can have an opportunity to apply for our ongoing call for a proposal. So with that said, I'm Sampath Veeraraghavan, the Global Chair of IEEE Site Steering Committee. And today we are having the Site Day, which is the first ever inaugural Site Day. Very thrilled to join you all as part of this panel today. Coming to the topic, the challenges and stories of AI and humanitarian technology. AI, artificial intelligence, as you all know, is the field of computer science which enable us to develop systems which emulate human intelligence. I mean, it encompasses of a wide subcategories like within it like machine learning and so on, which we'll look into it. But before we get on to AI, let's take how significant or how large is the humanitarian problem space, right? And see why AI is a good fit, when it comes to the humanitarian technology space. Next slide. So here you can get a glimpse of the key problems today that pretty much it's been discussed in the humanitarian space. One is access to affordable healthcare, tackling the energy crisis, and transportation and climatic change, and providing more equitable access to information, and then clean drinking water, and natural and man-made disasters, and the relevant mitigation measures, and environmental protection and natural resource management, among numerous others application. On the right side, I just wanted to call out the 17 sustainable goals which UN has published. So essentially, this humanitarian space, is, as you can see here, many of the problem space here provides three major opportunity, right? I mean, one, it actually defines the core needs of the community. The community here can be the local community or it can be a global community. Currently, we are all facing the, the COVID situation, which is, a global healthcare crisis that been observed across different nations, right? So fundamentally, this needs actually provides the opportunity for innovation. And then the second thing is, as you can see here, the pattern that you can see here is these problems are like really like critical problems that impact humanity as a single entity, right? So that means the scale of data, what we are talking about is also like, extremely large actually, right? So looking at this, there are a few common things here. One is a common pattern handling large volume of data, and solving as a problem here is going to be easily portable across multiple countries or multiple regions. That's why humanitarian space provides such a great opportunity from the innovation standpoint, in order to come with a solution which is easily scalable and can handle data at large, and provide the ability to address some of the important development challenges at grassroots level. Next slide. Okay, so AI for social good, right? So when you talk about AI, here we are talking about computer vision, machine learning, robotics, speech recognition, and natural language processing, even spoken language understanding. I mean, these are the various technology that exist in AI. In other words, these are the potential applications where we can innovatively apply artificial intelligence techniques. On the right side, you can see some core applications of AI, right? One is disaster response. For example, if when a disaster happens, you can actually leverage AI to understand the supply and demand, right? For example, if you take the corona situation right now, we'll be able to, from social media feeds, we'll be able to understand what are the various needs and how people are thinking about the current situation, understand the behavioral patterns, their needs pattern. Toilet paper has become suddenly like more precious than gold these days, right? So so this kind of solutions can be formulated using artificial intelligence, and also digital healthcare, right? I mean, today we don't have the bandwidth to perform early screening. So even for corona or even for developmental delays of some sort, we can actually create automated solution using artificial intelligence, which can actually help you to come handy, especially in low resource setting where you don't have an army of doctors basically immediately, right? So that's where this kind of tools which are AI based comes really like useful and meaningful, where it's agile and it also helps to provide the right level of information to the stakeholders and to start any kind of rehabilitation or any treatment as early as possible. And then another, call out I would say here is one interesting topic that Valentine touched upon is AA is immensely applicable in human rights, and especially like when it comes to supporting refugees. I have seen projects where AA assisted tools are leveraged to collect information to help people to seek asylums, and also to help with them to scheduling and reminding them about their court representations and so on. And another interesting area which is catching up right now is, I would say, like in addition to the healthcare, is assistive technologies, mainly focusing on both helping, differently abled people as well as elderly care. For example, spoken language technology has been on the front runner right now, where several products, smart speakers, people are leveraging to provide this kind of social connectivity, especially being really helpful to set up reminders for elderly people and so on. And lastly, the mapping vulnerable communities. Today, I think AI also plays a very critical role in terms of leveraging satellite images, to understand whether if there is a malaria outbreak or some kind of outbreak, to understand the prevalence pattern, as well as to understand, like, if there is a migration of vulnerable communities, to understand, how the migration happens, and also like to understand if there is specific schools or you wanted to identify certain point of interest. I think you leverage the satellite images and use some kind of classification systems to to identify the point of interest here. So fundamentally, any AI solution is, it depends on certain key aspects or key factors, I would say, like the data sets, right? I mean, if you want to create a system which has to, emulate human intelligence, the most important thing is accuracy standpoint, right? I mean, the system has to be as accurate as possible, right? And there are different ways, different mechanisms. That's why machine learning comes into picture, where you have different mechanisms to train your system to make it more smarter, and smarter and more accurate, and so on. Another call out here is infrastructure and the measure of success, right? I mean, you don't want to create a tool which basically is used for some kind of prediction, but then the prediction is offset by say 70% or 80% all the time, then it's pointless, right? So, that's where I think data becomes very critical. The wide range of data that you leverage to create your models or create your systems plays a very critical role in terms of producing one of the world-class AI systems. And finally, the ease of access and use, right? I mean, these are has to be like self-servable solutions which can be even leveraged by a nascent user. It should not be complicated, right? So again, this is a summary of various AI based technology and potential applications, and some critical factors that's a good AI based solution depends on. Next slide. Now, how does AI enable solution is a great fit for humanitarian space, right? One, as we seen earlier, looking at all the different flavor of humanitarian problem, one thing we have seen there is common there is we need to deal with peta or even like a more large amount of data at scale, right? And then the second thing is AI provides you this creative solution formulation, right? I mean, once you train your system, potentially, if you keep on, getting, the latest pulse of your, usage or your use case, I think the system learns by itself. If it's based on, some kind of unsupervised learning, it helps actually to result in, creative solution formulation. The third thing is, as one of the interesting data that come out from Valentine's presentation is, today the use of AI specifically in the non-profit sector is, I would say, still in the nascent stage, right? So we have an enormous potential to leverage AI as a technology to solve problems which are faced by people, like a huge at scale actually, right? So that becomes a critical component why AI is getting, more and more people are interested in leveraging AI for solving complex humanitarian related issues. And most importantly, as an engineer or as a person, when you develop any technology where you can see the impact to the grassroots underserved community, it actually provides a sense of satisfaction that you are contributing for a larger cause. And also it helps you to promote STEM education, as well as the importance of leveraging technology to solve such a kind of critical problems faced by your local community. So making it to be a potential avenue to become an ambassador to promote engineering related work streams. The most important again is also to promote the ethical use of AI, not only covering the positive angle but also the negative implications as well, which means we need to make sure that the data that we collect using such systems are properly secured, and the data privacy measures are in place, and whatever data that is being leveraged, there are governance process and policies in place to ensure the fair use of data in order to provide useful and meaningful humanitarian efforts for people at grassroots level. Next slide. So, given this, the next few slides, I would like to specifically focus about, how IEEE site as a program that you can leverage to roll out or potential AI related projects that can benefit your human local community, right? So a site asset program, I think in the earlier call out, it's a truly global organization. We have more than 7,500 members in 104 countries, and site members comes together to formulate groups, and these groups essentially are focused in conducting projects, and there are about 156 site groups in 52 countries. And we typically fund about projects from 1,000 to 20,000 US dollars. Of course, if there is projects which are above that range, we typically take it to our parent body, which is the Humanitarian Activity Committees in IEEE. Next slide. Now, the most important call out here right now is, site, as you can see here, provides a lot of value to our members, and one of the value here is we provide a global platform to connect you with the local stakeholders, right? I mean, you work with the local community, the local nonprofits, you understand their needs, then you identify the right technology to devise your solutions. So as a student or a young professional or a site member, we provide you the real world opportunity to leverage your technical skills to solve key humanitarian issues. That's basically perfectly aligns with the larger vision of IEEE, which is advancing technology for the benefit of humanity. Now, in addition to that, there are other core benefits we offer in terms of training and awareness, and making sure that people are closely working with the sustainability development community, and then contributing to the larger vision of benefiting humanity at large. Next slide. Now, in a nutshell, how you can leverage AI and site, given the current situation is that currently we are soliciting proposal for a special call for proposal where we fund up to $5,000 if you can devise a minimum viable product or an idea or a prototype which can solve some of the critical challenges with relevant to the current corona situation. And some examples here. I mean, the great thing about this process right now was any proposal that is submitted, it has a turnaround time of within a week, to have their decision. So we are meeting twice a week, and so far we have approved up to 8 proposals. Some of the interesting proposals I would say here are a data visualization tool that we funded in South Africa, where the idea is to collect the data about corona related data and provide a holistic representation of how the region has been impacted, so that the local policymakers and healthcare workers can plan their the remedial measure to slow down the spread of corona. So that was one interesting project. So similarly, there are projects like designing ventilators. Look, we are specifically looking only for the prototype or the design here. Of course, we want to reduce the risk to our volunteers. So we really don't want you to send you into any on the ground initiative at this point, given the current situation. So so if you have an idea where you can potentially use AI to come with an app, or even to create a system which can consume the local needs and then can provide the meaningful visualization of the demand and supply, I think that could be a good fit for the current call for proposal. And we have some references as well here, how you can apply for this proposal, and what are the requirements, and the links to the application form. So I would definitely will encourage all the participants today to take a look at it and see how you can be part of this proposal. The next last slide, I would probably would like to call out a few insights to you, what a winning proposal looks like. There are 4 major components we typically look into a proposal. One is the involvement of community. These are bottom up proposals. In other words, the needs of the community drives the vision of your project. So I may be an expert in AI. That doesn't mean like my solution is going to be like my technology may be a fit for every single problem space. So we really wanted to make sure that you are understanding the community needs, and then you are rightly fitting in the relevant technology. And then any partnership that you can have with the local non-profits, or even with the local community or governmental organization, that will add more credibility to your proposal. And then the most important call out is a clear cut solution development plan. Like, how do you plan to transform the needs, local community needs, into potential solution? And then a well defined project plan, which calls about what you plan to deliver, when you plan to deliver, and how you plan to deliver. And how do you measure the success of your project, right? There has to be some kind of metrics to measure it, right? Both positive or negative, right? So we would like to understand that. And finally, a plan of sustainability, like how do we envision this project to continue after the seed funding is complete is consumed. So these are some of the critical guidelines typically that the reviewers take into consideration. So with that said, the last slide, again, if there are any specific question with respect to the special call for, write to us. So I'm going to stop here, and probably along with Valentine, we'll take up questions from our participants.
Thank you, Sampath. Okay, so we've got one submitted by Dr. Sheikh. It says, thank you for the informative presentation. There's a huge opportunity to use AI or deep learning for analyzing human behavior. During the COVID-19 pandemic, we are expecting huge behavioral change among IEEE volunteers in terms of their work environment and interaction. So is there any plan about data collection or a survey among IEEE volunteers?
Okay, good call out, Dr. Sheikh. Thanks a lot for joining from Bangladesh. I believe it's midnight for you, so appreciate your interest. So I think right now I think we have planning some survey. At the same time, we also want to be a little careful here, kind of what kind of information we are collecting. So the idea here is certainly we would like to hear the stories, and we'll collect some generic form of data to understand what are the needs of our volunteers at this point, right? And for example, today we have educational content created, of course, by Dr. Pali and you on the sustainable development space. Maybe like now, by having a survey, we may actually come out with additional educational content, mainly focused on impact measurement or any additional topic that our volunteers are interested. So there are plans right now. Given that the next few months everything is going to be virtual mostly, it perfectly makes sense to have a follow-up survey to collect some kind of expectation on topics and workshops that our volunteers needs them. And there'll be some surveys that will be conducted probably in some May or June timeframe.
Thank you, Sampath.
I see one question there actually. Uh, Data is very important.
Go ahead.
What are, yeah, implications in our private? What are the implications of privacy? Okay, I can touch a few points, and then probably it's great to get some inputs from Valentine as well here. I think data privacy is a very critical factor. For example, if you take healthcare, right? I mean, in US we have HIPAA regulations in place, right? The data has to be secured. And if a customer wants to ask a particular company that they need to delete the data, like GDPR in Europe, right? You wanted to make sure that you honor that, right? So I think holding the topmost priority for any private sector company or any technology owner, I would say, is safeguarding the trust of the customer. In this case, the customers are all of us. So privacy is a very key important topic, both from two standpoint, right? I mean, one is when you have a product or a technology that's based out of AI and you collect the information, to what extent you can leverage the data for making your system more smarter. That's one way. The second way is, how do you ensure you can create some form of pseudonymized or anonymized data, and then make the data to be generic enough so that you can you kind of filtering out or any sensitive information and just have an anonymous version of the data to train your models, your AI systems, right? So these are very critical topic, and definitely I think when someone devises an AI project, the key call out here is uh, data, right? Who governs the data, how securely data is handled, and what are the measures taken to reduce the risk if the data is exposed. I think those are the factors that should be accounted when you want to design an AI system. And I'll also love to hear from Valentine as well on this topic of privacy in AI.
So just privacy in general. I'm not sure what the question is. Of course, privacy is important. I've been trying to survey all the geolocation tracking devices, contact tracing devices that are being put forward right now by private organizations, by governments, to be able to, contribute to the fight against COVID pandemic. We had just finished submitting with one of the AI Impact Alliance committees to the Privacy Commission in Canada around how to adapt our privacy laws to AI. Of course, we're always mitigating between public health, public benefit, and risks to privacy being a human right. If the benefit to society is more important and the sacrifice to privacy is less, then we go in that direction. There's a very unclear divide. It depends on the situation. So I've been trying to go through all the different types of applications and regulatory models in which they are being deployed. So maybe that I saw a question a little higher up from Fernando around technology moving so fast. And technology is moving very fast, and in the context of fighting against COVID, I think it's moving even faster. We saw in Israel just yesterday, I think, the Supreme Court struck down the application for contact tracing because it was being used by secret services in the government. In Canada, different contexts, and Germany did the same thing. The history against what was done to the Nazis is very close still in the history. Canada, we're very trusting. Nothing, and I'm going to say we're very trusting, but we could go back to 2 wars ago and see what happened to the Japanese community. And maybe they would not answer the same thing right now as what I'm saying today in 2020. But I would say in 2020, generally speaking right now, if our government says we're going to sacrifice a little bit of your privacy and use contact tracing to fight COVID, most people are just going to say yes. It really depends on the context, and therefore the regulation around the deployment depends on that, as well as investment into solving the social problems. I do see an unbalance sometimes. We do tend to want to invest more in a technological solution, thinking it's going to be an easy fix, but there are deep social problems behind that, and social inequalities at a global scale, at a local scale, that are also important to fund and address. So finding the right balance in protection of privacy, in funding, in policies around, let's say, just in the context of these contact and geolocation devices that are being put out there. I think it's not a black and white answer and a black and white, it's rather complex, and there's people from all over the world right now online, so I'll limit my answer to that for now.
Great. Juliana, any additional questions?
Yes, thank you so much for that insight. We do have one submitted by Dr. Celia, also from Bangladesh. How can AI be used to detect a real text message versus a malicious text message? Can such projects be encouraged by SITE to save the reputation of a person whose phone number is suspended for a wrong reason? And what thoughts do you have about that?
Yeah, so again, it's a little tricky thing. I mean, I think we already have classification systems available in order to solicit between like, it's kind of like a filtering system, actually, what we are referring here. Again, it depends on the context here. I mean, this sounds to me like more like a security project, potentially, I mean, can help in the privacy angle of it. But then the humanitarian angle, I think the security is also an important angle. So I think if there's a good proposal which talks about how significant this problem is, then I think contextually based on that, we'll be able to evaluate it further. But I feel like right now, I think cybersecurity and especially this kind of preventing spam related filters, I think many of the system underneath leverages AI and machine learning mechanisms to handle that. So certainly it will be a good fit.
I see a question also at the bottom from Jesse about where does the funding come from? I'm not sure which, the funding for what exactly, Jesse. If you're still online, maybe you want to just text the rest of your question.
Yeah, so I think the funding for the special call for proposal is coming from both HAC and SITE. The mandate of IEEE board vision is to roll out feet on the ground initiatives so IEEE members can come together, use their technical skill set to solve the local needs or challenges faced by the local community. Humanitarian Activity Committee, it basically carries the mandate, the goal actually. And SITE is basically the implementation mechanism for Humanitarian Activity Committee in order to implement a real world project on the ground to fulfill this goal. So the answer here is both HAC and SITE are providing this. The way it works is you submit a proposal, we evaluate, and if the proposal is selected, the funding comes to your site group or to basically to a section, and then the funding will be dispersed from there. And I mean section here, I mean the local IEEE section, which in this case will be Montreal.
And Sampath, perhaps you could also speak to Fernando's question. With the advent of 5G coupled with IoT and increase of machine-to-machine communications, how can AI mitigate the tsunami that is coming?
Okay, there again, now we are getting into how we deal with peta volumes of, petabytes of data, right? I feel like so there are multiple ways this can be dealt with, right? I mean, as you say, IoT is a great field, and then AI can be used there to essentially to uh, perform data classification, or even to segment the data what you are collecting from the sensors, and to come back with the customized applications for you. For example, right, you may have a couple of field sensors on a farming land, and you can collect all the data that's coming from your IoT sensor, and you can very well create a model which can actually predict based upon the sensor values, the climatic condition, or the condition of your farming land, to tell you, like, whether the next course of action needs to be taken or not, right? So there are n number of possibilities here. And again, AI by itself have some other dependencies, right? The infrastructure, right? If you're dealing with a huge scale of data running into petabytes, of course, you need the computing powers as well in terms of CPU, storage devices. So in those cases, all you need is an integrated solution, which will ensure that you are able to handle the great volume of data that's being generated from the ICT applications.
Right. If I could, I find just from a non-technical perspective, in that question, Fernando, maybe we could also reverse the question, because in the desire to be able to apply AI, are we creating IoT devices that can collect data to do better prediction, for example? So AI can probably not necessarily mitigate the tsunami, manage the tsunami of information that we'll be facing, but we can also reverse. I know a lot of startups who are developing IoT devices with the long-term goal. And when I work with nonprofit organizations and civil society organizations, we look at how, so for example, the Yukon is a northern territory in Canada. The Human Rights Commission there implemented a chat bot to allow citizens to make claims outside of business hours. That will create more data collection. And so in this case, the IoT is increasing the amount of data that we're having. And so I was just kind of looking at how we could also look at your question from a different perspective, and how that increase of data, I think the flow needs to go more to the organizations that need them right now. We're probably running out of time. I think we're going over time, but around data and the AI for good, I often find there's a lot of AI for good washing as well. There's this application called Squirrel in China that sold 10,000 certificates. That was last year. There are probably more now, where they personalize education and make access to education for remote areas. And when I went to speak with the staff, the Squirrel staff, they mentioned that they don't need teachers anymore. I said, what do you do with teachers? Well, say we don't need teachers. We just need a human to push the kid's head back towards the screen when they're not looking anymore. So who's collecting the data that is analyzing the child's attention span? Who's collecting their voices in terms of identity? I think it's extremely important not to go out there and do AI for good without an awareness of where your data not just is coming from, but where it's going as well, because that will have an impact eventually on who's using and who's benefiting from the application. So I'm kind of like always the party pooper, because I'm like the risk manager. I don't know if you remember the financial crisis, and then they started having risk managers in banks. I often feel like the risk manager in AI. I strongly believe in its potential benefit for society, but I think it is important to look at where the funding is coming from. It is important to look at where the data is going when we're moving forward in these hopeful applications of AI for humanitarian goals. That was my closing statement. And anybody, feel free to email me, follow us on social media. We're always happy to exchange and dialogue and share information. And that's it. Thank you so much, the organizers.
Thank you so much. It was very insightful and really appreciated those last closing comments. Sampath, yeah, I think if you would like to share any last thoughts, we'll go ahead and conclude the session.
Sure, definitely. This is amazing, and thanks to Montreal site leadership team for organizing this panel. Very, very happy to honored to share the panel today with Valentine. It was, very wonderful insights, totally from the AI from a ethical standpoint and what a responsible AI should be like. Great insights on that. With that said, from my side, we really enjoyed interacting with you all today, and please stay safe, and collectively we all can overcome this challenging time to prove that we are all together, as a family. All of us are together in this journey, given the corona situation. So with that said, thank you everyone.
Thank you, Sampath. Thank you, Valentine. Thank you to Diana and Mohammed as well. Thank you, Fernando, for joining. And thank you to all of our attendees.